Hi everyone. Today I will talk about the journey of mastering Magento 2 for Magento 1 developers. Here's my background. I've been working as web developer for more than 10 years. I've been working with Magento for the last 7 years, and I have all the Magento certifications. Now, how many of you see Magento 1 and Magento 2 as two completely different platforms? I see a lot of hands. Okay. Today, you will see that there are a lot of common concepts between Magento 1 and Magento 2. On top, I will show you a module for Magento 1, and below, I will show you a module for Magento 2. As you can see, in Magento 1, there are too many files in too many different folders. When you have several modules, this is a problem. So let's compare this with a module containing all those files and even more in Magento 2. As you can see, all the files for the module are located in the module folder. At the same time, all the modules in the code base are located in the app local folder. It's really nice. Next, we have the official Magento 2 command line tool. We can use the command line tool by running php bin/magento, and as you can see, it provides a lot of commands. Let's review some of them. You can set the developer mode in Magento. By doing that, you have automatic code compilation and error logging. You can clear the cache. You can run the upgrade and the install scripts for your modules. You can run the reindex process. You can enable and disable modules. There are a lot of additional commands. Those are just a few, but I recommend you to review all of them to increase your productivity and manage your websites. So, it's time to review some Magento code. To keep it simple, all the code that is in black and white is boilerplate code. So, it's code that it's equal in all the modules. So let's start by declaring a module. So in Magento 1, you have to create two files. First, you have to declare the module in the app etc modules folder, and then you have to create the config file for the module configuration. Now, in Magento 2, we have to create two files as well. First, we create the registration file, and there we set the vendor and the module name. And then we have to create the module.xml file in the etc folder. There, once again, we have to set the module and the vendor name, as well as the version number for the module. As you can see, just two files, it's really simple. Now, two things to consider in order to get the module working in the website. First, you have to run the php bin/magento module enable command in order to enable the module. You can confirm that the module is enabled by looking at the app etc config file. And then you have to run a second command, which is the php bin/magento setup upgrade. By doing that, the database is updated, and we can find a new record in the setup module table containing the version number for the module. Now, let's talk about shell scripts. In Magento 1, we create a new class and we extend the Mage shell abstract class. Now, in Magento 2, the right way of adding or creating a shell script is adding a new command in the Magento 2 command line tool. In order to do that, you have to create two files. First, the object manager configuration file, which is etc/di.xml. A second, you have to create the class for the command in the console command folder. So, on the object manager configuration file, you declare a new command and you set the unique name for the command and the class. Then on the class, you extend the Symfony component console command class, and you override two protected methods, the configure and the execute method. There, this is very important, we set the name of the command to run in the console, meaning every time we run php bin/magento, we can run the command, this particular command, using this name. And we can set a description as well. Then, on the execute method, we have two parameters, input and output. Input is used to get the arguments for the command. So, for example, when we set the developer mode, using the command line, we pass developer as one of the arguments. The code is actually getting that argument using the input parameter. And then we have output, which is used to write messages and information in the command line. So, let's see the new command. When I run php bin/magento, I can see that one of the commands in the list is the new command. There we can see the name and the description. Then we can run the command by using that name, and we get the output. Next up are the helpers. In Magento 1, we declare the helpers node in the config file, and then we create the helper class extending Mage core helper abstract. In Magento 2, we don't need HTML. We just create the helper class in the helper folder. There we extend the Magento framework app helper abstract helper class, and we implement all the helper methods. Now, calling the helper from a template is really simple. We just have to use this helper, and then we pass the full class. However, calling the helper from a backend class is different. In Magento 2, it's considered a best practice to use dependency injection to include objects using the object manager. Let's review how to do that. So first, we declare the class in the constructor. Second, we create the protected variable. Then we instantiate the class on the variable, and last, we can use the class by using the variable. So on this example, we are trying to use the helper on the block. So first, we pass the helper class on the constructor, we create the variable, we instantiate the helper on the variable, and then we can call any helper method. Next, install and data install scripts. So, in Magento 1, we declare the resources node in the config file, and then we create the SQL folder for install scripts and the data folder for data install scripts. In Magento 2, once again, we don't need XML, and there is just one folder, which is setup. There we can find two files, install schema for install scripts and install data for data install scripts. As you can see, the logic for both files is very similar. The only difference is that they are implementing different Magento classes. So the install schema file is implementing the Magento framework setup install schema interface class, and the install data file is implementing the install data interface from the same namespace. And there you can see the install method. There we add the logic for scripts, and we have two parameters, the setup and the context. The setup is used to update the database, and the context is used to get additional information for the module, such as the version number for the module and more information. Now, you may want to update the database after installing the module. Then you have to increase the version number for the module, and you have to create the upgrade scripts. In Magento 1, we use the same folders than before, and we create the upgrade files using the previous version number and the upgrade version number. In Magento 2, we use the same folder as well, which is setup. And we have two files, the upgrade schema file for upgrade scripts and the upgrade data file for data upgrade scripts. The logic for these files is similar to the logic of the install script files in Magento 2. The difference, again, is that they implement different Magento classes. So the upgrade schema file is implementing the Magento framework setup upgrade schema interface class, and the upgrade data file is implementing the upgrade data interface class from the same namespace. There we can find the upgrade method to run the script logic, and we can find the setup and context parameters as we have seen before. As you can see here, in Magento 1, we have one file for each upgrade. So we can find in a module multiple upgrade files, which is very difficult to review sometimes. As you can see, in Magento 2, we place the logic for all the upgrades in the upgrade schema and the upgrade data files. And we add if statements to compare the previous version number with the upgrade version number. Magento will run this method, and if the if statement is true, then the upgrade is applied to the website. Now, two things to mention here. First, when we work on Magento 1, you have to reload the page in order to run the upgrade scripts. Now, in Magento 2, you have to run a specific command. This command is setup upgrade. And the second thing is that the core resource table from Magento 1 is now the setup module table in Magento 2. Next, the models. So, you may want to store and save data in a custom entity. That entity needs a database table and a model to communicate with that table. In Magento 1, we specify the model and the resource model class as well as the table name in the config file. Then we create a class for the model, a class for the resource model, and a class for the collection. In the resource model class, we specify the table name and the primary key. We do exactly the same in Magento 2. The only difference is that we don't need XML and we implement classes from the Magento framework. So we create the class for the model, the class for the resource model, and the class for the collection. In the model class, we specify the resource model class. Then on the resource model, just like Magento 1, we specify the table name and the primary key. And last, in the collection, we specify the model class and the resource model class. It's that simple. Next, event observers. In Magento 1, we add the events node next to the models node in the config file. And we define the name of the event to observe, the class, and the method to run. In Magento 2, we have a specific configuration file for event observers. The name of that file is events.html. The location of that file will set the scope for the event observers. So, for global observers, we add that file to the etc folder. For frontend observers, we add the file to the etc frontend folder. And for admin observers, we add the file to the etc admin HTML folder. The content for the global, the frontend, the admin observer, in the case of the configuration file, the content is the same. The important part is the event node. Just like Magento 1, we said the name of the event to observe, our custom class, and the unique identifier. Then, on the class, we implement the Magento framework event observer interface, and we have the execute method to add the custom logic for observer. Now, in Magento 1, you can have multiple event observers in one observer class. So you can find something like this. Now, in Magento 2, we have one file, one class for each event observer. And this is very important since in Magento 2, we want each class to have a specific role in the system. So as you can see, before we had 4 event observers in one file, and in Magento 2, we have one file for each event observer. And this is very cool. I love it. This is a new concept from Magento 2. We can implement plugins to add custom code before, after, or around a public class method. And when we implement a plugin, we are using the interception technique. The interception technique is basically a way to add custom code dynamically without modifying the original class. We can use the before plugin to modify the original arguments. We can use the after plugin to modify the return values, and we can use the around plugin to modify the original arguments and modify the return values. So let's review how to do it. We have to implement the object manager configuration file and a class for the plugin. In the object manager configuration file, we have the type node and the plugin tag. In the type node, we set the class that contains the public method that we want to observe. In this case, the Magento catalog model product class. And then in the plugin tag, we set the custom class that we create for the plugin. Then, on that class, we can have 3 different methods. The name of those methods should start with before, after, or around, and then the name of the method that we observe. So, on this example, we are observing the can affect option method, and we have the before, after, and around can affect options methods in the plugin. Now, what if you want to rewrite a class? Well, the answer is don't do it. It's not recommended. That's why we have the plugins, to avoid rewrites. But if you still need or want to implement a rewrite, you can use a preference in Magento 2. In order to do that, you have to add the preference tag to the object manager configuration file. It's really simple. You just define the original class and your custom class. With this line, every time Magento tries to instantiate the original class, the system returns your custom class. Again, avoid rewrites, that's why we have the plugins now. Next up are the controllers. In Magento 1, we add the routers node to the config file, and then we create the controller class. In this example, we are creating a front-end controller, so we extend the Mage core controller from action class. Similar to observers, in Magento 2, there is a specific configuration file for the controllers. And just like the observers, the location of that file will set the scope for the controller. If it's a front-end controller, we add the file to the etc front-end folder, and for admin controllers, we add the file to the etc admin HTML folder. Then, on that file, the difference between the front-end and the admin controller is the router ID. For front-end controllers, the router ID is standard, and for admin controllers, the router ID is admin. Then, we define the front name and the unique identifier for the controller. And finally, we set the module name in the module tag. Then, on the class, we extend the Magento framework app action class, and we have the execute method, just like the observers, to run the controller logic. So, the URL for the controller will be the front name, then the folder for the controller, and last, the class that we created. And these are the controllers in Magento 1. You all know that we can have several actions in one controller class. So you can have add, edit, delete action, all inside one controller class. In Magento 2, there is one class, one file for each controller action. So edit, add, delete will be 3 different files in Magento 2. All of them having the execute method to add the controller logic. Next, we have to talk about CSS. In Magento 1.9, we use SCSS to generate CSS. In Magento 2, we use less. So, in Magento 1, we declare the CSS path in the layout file, and then we create the SCSS file in the CSS folder of the theme. After that, we have to compile the styles using Compass, And then we have the CSS file ready in the CSS folder, again, of the theme. In Magento 2, we declare the CSS path in the layout file as well. So we have the CSS tag, we declare the CSS path, and as you can see there, we can reference the module folder by using the vendor and the module name, and we add the CSS tag to the head node. Then we have to create the less files using the less syntax and features. And one thing to mention is that the folder for the layout file and the less file is inside the module folder. So for the layout, we add the file to the view frontend layout folder. And for the less file, we can add that file to the module folder inside the view frontend web CSS. And the good practice is adding that file to the source folder. Now, in order to compile the styles in Magento 2, we have to set Magento to developer mode. Then, we have to go to the admin panel, to the stores, configuration, advanced developer section, and set the front-end development workflow to be client-side less compilation. And this is important because next time when you are working on the project, when you reload the page in the browser, the less styles will be compiled and the CSS file will be created in the pub static folder. Finally, we have JavaScript. Similar to the styles, in Magento 1, we declare the JS path in the layout file, and then we just create the JS file in the theme. Very simple, very easy. But this is JavaScript in Magento 1. A very popular screenshot, you can see this in most of the events. We have a lot of script tags on every page, which means that we have a lot of additional HTTP requests on page load. Magento 2 implements RequireJS, which is a framework to load JavaScript on the fly. RequireJS loads the JavaScript files dynamically on the fly if Magento needs them, reducing the number of HTTP requests on page load. As you can see, it's really nice. So when we load the page in Magento 2, RequireJS is there loading the JavaScript files. This is important. Before in Magento 1, we declared this JS file in the layout file of the theme. In Magento 2, to ensure that RequireJS load that file dynamically, we declare the JS file on the template. And there are two ways of doing this. First, we can use the data Mage init attribute. And second, we can use a special script tag from Magento 2. But this is important because this is from the template, so we don't use XML anymore. Let's review the data Mage init attribute first. First, we are calling the JS file here. So, two things to mention. We can reference the module folder by using the vendor and the module name. And you can see that there. And second, as you can see here, the .js extension is not required anymore. So when you use Magento 2 and you reference the JS file, you don't add the .js extension. And then we can pass custom values to the JS file. Now, the second method is the custom Magento 2 script tag. As you can see, there is a special main type right there, which is text/Magento init. This for the browser is just text. It's a special script tag for Magento. And there, first we want to specify the ID or class of the element in the page. Why? Because Magento will search for this file on the page. If Magento finds that file, then it proceeds to include the file. So that is why RequireJS is important. It loads the files only if Magento needs them. Second, we can reference the JS file in the same way than the previous method. And last, as the previous method, we can reference custom values to pass to the JS file. So now, I would like to show you the JS file. This is a special syntax, and again, this is really cool for Magento 2. You can define dependencies on the JS file. So on this example, we are referencing jQuery. The cool feature from RequireJS is that the dependencies are included and loaded dynamically on the fly as well. So this happens once you request a page by RequireJS. Then we add the custom logic for the JS file, and we can get the arguments using the config parameter. So if we go back to the previous method, you can see that we are passing alert title, and here we can get that value. So since this is a template, you can pass basically anything from Magento, from the blocks, using PHP. You pass that to a JS file, and you can get that value using the config arguments. So this is the template and the JS file for Magento 1. I'm sorry, for the method number 1. And this is the template and the JS file for the method number 2. Magento 2 creates the front-end files for all the modules on the fly. Those files are included on the pub static folder. And this is important because when you are working on a project, you want to make sure you get the latest changes for your file. So those files include CSS, JS, layouts. So if you are working on a project and you are wondering why your changes are not on the browser, on the website, then you have to remove that folder. And you can do that from the admin panel as well, on the system cache management page. So what is the final conclusion here? All you need is code. Just like Magento 1, the best way to implement Magento 2 modules is looking for code samples that follow the Magento conventions and best practices. And you can find those code samples in the Magento code base. So every time you are wondering how to do anything in Magento 2, you have to go there and see how the Magento team implemented that specific feature. You can find additional code samples in the official Magento 2 samples repository in GitHub. And I love this one. We have now the official Magento 2 developer documentation, which is covering everything from backend to frontend, so I recommend you to review that. And this is a personal recommendation. This is a screenshot from my machine for my Mac. As you can see, there are a lot of modules there. I keep every single module that I implemented for my clients. I have more than 300 modules for Magento 1. So every time I am looking for a code sample and I can't find the code sample in the Magento code base, I go to this folder, I open this folder with PHP Storm, and I search for the code that I need to implement. So we are very lucky to be part of this community, all of us. Magento 1 changed everything about e-commerce in 8 years, and we are going to do it again in Magento 2. Thank you very much.